First of all, I just want to say thank you guys for coming today. I've had several conversations already since coming to AES, and LGS is a tough problem, but every one of you in this room is committed to helping our families. So I just want to say thank you for that. My daughter, Savannah, is 29. She's about to be 30, and I was thinking about this in the middle of the night last night as I was stressing about all the last-minute details for this meeting here. And, there's been some progress. There was no LGS Foundation, right? There was no support. There was barely an internet back then, 29 years ago. But in large part, we're still treating LGS the same way. We throw a treatment at it. We're not learning from every patient. And we hope for the best. And that's not a judgment. That's just the reality. And every day, we have thousands and thousands of families in our community. And every day, we talk to these families, and we hear the journey they're on. And we want to change it for them. And so we do a lot of work to find out exactly what they want and how they prioritize things. And so I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I think it's time. I mean, the foundation is here, and we're ready to start moving the needle on research. We're raising money to fund research and push it forward. And especially on clinical research. So I just want to thank you guys for being here. Let me jump into my slides. Now, we do have people at home watching, so thank you. Hi, everybody that's watching online. And like I said, if you guys still want to get something to eat while we're talking or grab another drink, or they're going to come around and do refills, please do that. So first, I want to thank our organizing committee for helping us to prepare for this. And it fell to a couple of these individuals that I really want to call out. Scott Perry and Elaine Worrell were just really instrumental in helping to plan today. So if you liked it, you should come pat them on the back. If you didn't like it, they're both sitting right here. You can let them know that the talks, no, I'm just kidding, they're going to be fantastic. So thank you for our planning committee. We really just couldn't do this without our doctor and scientist experts. I want to thank our incredible sponsor, Takeda, who has been just an amazing partner for us. Yes. In research and in helping to bring new hope to our families with their trials. So I just want to say thank you guys for sponsoring this roundtable and really being committed to advancing LGS research and not giving up on our families. A lot of people want to give up on LGS. It's too hard. And so I just applaud anybody that comes in the space. And so thank you to you guys. I also want to thank our additional partners. They're listed here. Each of these individual companies have just been fantastic also in bringing forward hope and bringing forward reality checks too, along with that, not over-promising, although you can't really over-promise in LGS. It's a disaster 24/7, as you're going to see. But I just want to thank you to our gold sponsors. And of course, I don't want to forget our wonderful silver and bronze sponsors. We would not be able to be here and meet over lunch if it weren't for you, incredible people who are helping us to move things forward and to carry on the conversation. So this is our AES Research Roundtable. We have a luncheon every year. I think this is our 10th or 11th one of these. And this one is on advancing clinical research in LGS. And we have about 2.5 hours to have this conversation or something like that, like 3 hours. You might be thinking, how in the heck are you going to fit advancing clinical research? And I just want to say that this is a primer. This meeting here is a primer for a larger discussion that's going to happen in September. I hope you'll mark your calendars. It's going to start on September 13th, and I already see a typo in my slide. It's from 13th to 15th. It'll start, the 13th is a Wednesday. It'll start that evening with reception, run all day on the 14th, and then half day on the 15th for the research meeting. And then on the 16th, we'll have a family day. But this is where we're really going to dive into how we're going to solve the problems. Today is really to set up a primer to raise the questions of what do we know about LGS? What do we still want to know and don't know? Where are we going? What are some things that are being done in the space, right? Like deep brain stimulation, anti-seizure medications, treatments, like what's happening in the space. And then to have a short discussion that primes us for this bigger meeting. So I hope you will write this in your calendar. It's going to be at the University of Maryland. Dr. Carino has graciously agreed to host us there. And it's sure to be a wonderful, wonderful meeting. So more on that. But get it into your calendars, and we hope you'll join us to continue the conversation. We did have one of these meeting of the minds 2 years ago in 2021. It was all virtual, and this one was on finding disease-modifying therapies in LGS. And I'm going to just summarize what we learned from it, but you can certainly go online and watch it. It was exceptional. And the reason we did this is because we actually asked our families, what do you want? How do you prioritize things? And I'm going to show you some of this data. I'm going to go through the data pretty quickly, but we asked them, and they basically said, listen, our biggest problem are these seizures. They are ruining our lives. They're pretty much happening in most of us every single day. And none of the seizure treatments that we've developed, we've tried them all, and they're not working. We want something that targets the underlying biology of the disease. They don't really necessarily know what that means. They all define it differently, but that's what they want. And they also want medicines that are coming out that target more than just the seizures. But do not forget the seizures. You are not going to get anything better in the majority of LGS patients if you ignore the seizures. They are horrible. So at that meeting of the minds, we talked about two things. I'm going to summarize what we talked about, what we learned from our patient families from listening to them. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what came out of the disease-modifying therapy work. But the first thing we learned, and you guys have all heard this, but living with LGS and the DEEs in general, the developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, it's more than just the medical aspects of it. And I like to think of LGS and the medical aspects of it. Like if all of LGS is the DC subway map, you got your red line, your blue line, your green line, the medical system is like 5 stops on the red line. We come rolling into the medical world, and we spend a lot of time there. You could argue that they're probably the most important 5 stops. But in reality, our snapshot of our lives in the medical world are a tiny footprint of our entire lives with this disease. And the decisions that are made in the medical offices or in the clinical trials or on the research line affect every other line we're on. I've got seizures and safety on here, diagnosis and treatment, I've got LGS-associated disorders, I've got school and community. I can't even add all the lines on here. And I'll just give you one example. A lot of people will say, I have epilepsy, and epilepsy doesn't have me. And I totally respect and appreciate that, but epilepsy totally has us. Like, literally has us. Every decision we make, including the type of toilet paper we buy, is impacted by our daughter's Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. It has to be flushable, it has to be wipes. So there's no decision, there's no place we go, there's no thing we do that is not impacted by this disease. So this is a different entity than maybe some of the other epilepsies or epilepsy syndromes that you guys have been thinking about. We asked our families, and this was a survey of over 400 families in 17 different countries, 2 different languages, what their issues were. And this is really how it came down. 97% of them said, we are still having seizures, most of them daily, but 60% of them daily, and then another 25% weekly. Sleep disruption, head, face, and injuries from seizures, severe developmental delay, behavioral issues, cannot read or write at all, cannot talk. Can't say, I've never uttered a 2-word sentence, right? Hospitalized at least once in the last year, and about 30% are tube fed. And then we asked the families the question that I think only they should be answering, is how do they prioritize these things? And the number one thing was seizures and safety. And the second was developmental delay, especially communication. And we would hear from our families things like, I just want to know if they're in pain. I just want to know if they're hungry. I just want them to make eye contact with me. Right? The bar is really low. And it's really interesting because Gervais did the same surgery, and they rank these things different. They have the exact same buckets, but they rank them a little bit differently than us. And I think one place you can see this is from the Rare Epilepsy Network data, the REN data. And this is just the slide on Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. But one of the main things that came out of this is that 14% have never sat up without help, 24% have never walked, 43% have never spoken a 2-word sentence. These numbers were all higher than any of the other 20-plus rare epilepsies that were interviewed in this. Not that we win any award, unless it's like the crap award for crappy epilepsy, but all of us have awful epilepsy. But the thing that really drew me was this right here, was seizures in the past 6 months, right here, 1,000 to 5,000. No other group answered that high. Everybody else answered in the 500 to 1,000s. If you looked at Gervais or if you looked at TS, in the last 6 months, 500 to 1,000. Our seizure burden is much, much higher. And if you've worked with any of the data, that you know that. And then we worked with Dr. Ann Berg and Perf on this incredible natural history study, a low end, but very rigorous work. And again, we showed a high seizure burden. 97% had seizures recently within the last 6 months. We saw a high burden of sleep disruption, that trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, multiple nights every week of not falling asleep and staying asleep. We saw a massive amount of seizure injuries, and this is all on the LGS Foundation website. I'm happy to give it to you if you email us at info@LGS Foundation, but massive number of seizure emergencies. The healthcare utilization, if you work with these patients, is so high. And the family impact is huge. Our kids aren't sleeping, we're in the hospital all the time, they're having seizures, they can drop at any moment. I mean, if you could drop at any moment and have a seizure, how would your life change? And our kids do drop, and they grow into adults, it's not just children. And then this was a great paper by Dr. Berg looking at the burden. And if you just look at the top lines, in green under mobility, feeding, hand grasp. The green at the very top of this chart here is when independence was achieved. But mostly, they never achieve independence in these areas. And so we've summed this up from our years of work, starting with our caregiver survey and moving into our patient-focused drug development meeting, and then moving into the work that we did for the Meeting of the Minds, that there's an LGS caregiver hierarchy of needs. And if you guys remember back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in psych class, at the bottom are your physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. And you have to have your psychological and your physiological and your safety needs met before you can achieve your best life, right? In LGS, we're spending all our time in these bottom levels. There's survival mode, which is when we're in crisis, we're in the hospital, we're having a seizure. My daughter's had 3 skull fractures, rescues all the time. And then there's safety mode, where you're just trying to avoid crisis. Will you just take your meds? Will you just eat? Will you just sleep? Will you just poop, please, so that you don't end up in the hospital again? They're going to go into crisis anyway, but we're trying to keep them from doing it. And then if, like my daughter, I've been on this incredible journey in 29 years. I was an uneducated young mom. My kid got sick. I wanted to help. I enrolled in college. I got a PhD. I found dozens of genes that actually cause DEEs because I was a gene hunter. I found the genetic causes in my kid. I found a precision medicine that actually reduced her seizures by an exponential number. And yet, I still live in coping mode all the time, where she is completely dependent on me to make sure she eats and takes her meds and goes to the bathroom. And so even in a success story like ours with LGS, it's still a huge burden. And so that was the outcome of our Meeting of the Minds, but the second outcome was this epileptogenesis concept in LGS. We talked a lot about this. We had basic scientists at this meeting, translational scientists, and some clinicians too. And we talked about how everyone with LGS has an etiology. Everyone has LGS secondary to something that caused their early life seizures or traumatic brain injury. And you can intervene. Each of the arrows at the top of this slide represent an intervention point. You can intervene at the etiology. And for the love of God, if you can intervene at the etiology, please do so. Let's not evolve. But you can also intervene at the evolution of the etiology to the seizures, like in the PREVENT trial for tuberous sclerosis. You can try to intervene in the DEE, the interplay between interictal discharges and seizures that somehow then leads to LGS. You'll hear the doctor say, oh, the AEG looks like it's going chaotic. It looks like they're going LGS. And it's like, well, what is that? Someone quantify that quick, right? And then they all converge on to slow spike and wave. Now, in a textbook, of course. That's not what happens in every single case. But to get the real actual diagnosis in a scientific study of LGS, you need to have the slow spike and wave. And there's some great work being done by the Australian groups. I know Dr. Warren is here, who's done some of that work, looking at functional connectivity and how it's very similar regardless of age or etiology in the LGSers that underlie the EEG features. And then that network that forms, that abnormal network, then atrophies over time and sets up a great place for seizures to continue, a nice warm place for seizures, and really disrupts learning. So we talked a lot about this, and it was great. We went to the scientists and we said, hey, here's the data, here's a mouse model of LGS, there's a couple of them, go forth. And they were thrilled. And we said, here's a funding mechanism. We have this great grant funding mechanism that we thought people would be like, oh my gosh, I submit a grant, I basically submit an LOI, and then in 2 weeks they tell me yes or no, and then I submit a full proposal if they say yes, and then like in a month or 6 weeks, they tell me if I get the money, and then I get the money. We thought, oh, everyone's gonna love this. Yeah, nobody's applying, really. So if you wanna apply for this grant, or tell us how we could do better to make it easier for you to apply for this grant. But we did have a couple of successful grants, and one is hot off the presses. Oling, Yvonne, and Ryan know about this, but we just awarded a grant to them looking at the KCN-B1 model of slow spike and wave and whether or not non-invasive ultrasound will make an impact in regions. They're looking specifically at regions that impact the thalamus and where DBS occurs. So it's really exciting research, and that's what came out of our last meeting. So as we move into this meeting and as we move into our Meeting of the Minds next September, and as we convene these conversations and you are committed alongside of us, like we can't quit. Like I'd love to go home and be like, yeah, LGS is too hard. But you guys can. And so I have just the deepest and utmost respect for you for being here and helping us to try to solve this really challenging problem. And so with that, we're gonna get our talk started with the idea that we're going on a year-long journey here to convene a series of conversations that will help to guide our funding strategy moving forward, because we wanna help. We wanna help. Patients want to help you guys move forward in your research, and we think we have a lot of meaningful information to offer. As you've seen from our surveys and the information, we can help set priorities, and we can raise money and move things forward. So